My name is Charles Harrell. I'm with the Veterans History Project. Today is January 29th, 2005. I'm here with Mr. Charles Logsdon, World War II vet. Mr. Logsdon, can you please state for the record your full name?
Charles Lee Logsden.
And what is your current address?
Route 5, Box 506, Kaiser, West Virginia, 26726.
Can you tell me when you were born?
April the 12th, 1919,
And where?
in Kaiser.
What branch of service were you in?
Army.
Can you tell me what your battalion was?
34th Engineers.
And did you get transferred?
Yes, I went from basic training, excuse me, I went from basic training to Hawaii, and I was drafted in June the 17th, 1941, and went basic training, and then we were shipped out to Hawaii, and the 34th Engineers was a newly founded regiment or service, a part of the Army service, and we became the initial companies of it.
And you were transferred to the 1521st Engineer Battalion later?
Yes.
I want to go back to your earliest memories of your family before the war. Can you please tell me the name of your parents?
Samuel L Logsden, Samuel Lee Logsden, and Maud Ellen Logsden, Maud Ellen Broom Logsden.
Can you tell me about your father and what he did?
My father was, both of my parents were orphans. My mother from childbirth and my father from age 12 or 13. And my father worked for the railroad. That was his main source of employment and his retirement.
What did he do for the railroad?
He was a carman, repair freight cars and whatever. He lost a foot at work. He was working a night shift at this particular time, and he lost a foot in June of 1944.
While you were off in service?
Yes.
But before that time, he was able-bodied and everything?
Oh, yes. Yeah, he was a strong, he was a strong man, not exceptionally tall. Maybe the same height I am, but.
Did you call him Dad?
Yeah.
What did he like to do? What was his hobby or fun thing he liked?
I guess gardening. That's what got us through the Depression. He was furloughed from the railroad in 1933, if I'm right. And that's what he started gardening and or went on to it. He knew gardening. That's what he knew.
And did you live in Kaiser the whole time?
No. I moved from, or the family moved from Kaiser when I was 3 years old. Excuse me. And thank you.
Sir.
We moved at the bottom of the mountain, bottom of this one, down about a quarter of a mile was my home place. My daughter lives there now.
So why did you move? I know you were too young to know, but do you know now why you moved?
He was a farm boy, and he didn't like city life. If you could call Kaiser a city. So.
Was it bigger back then?
No, it was big.
And did this move happen in the 20s, early 20s? Is that right?
Yeah.
But did he go back to work, or did he go working for the railroad during the 20s?
Yeah, he kept working for the railroad, even though he bought 56 acres of land when he moved out here. But he continued to work for the railroad until he was furloughed in 1933. So.
I want you to think back to something that happened before the Great Depression about your parents, your mother or your father, and tell me what tickles your thoughts as you think of them before the disaster of the Great Depression.
I don't know. It was living on the farm and having a horse to pet and a dog to pet and run wherever I wanted to, play ball, and play with my brother. I had one brother.
No
younger
sisters.
brother.
No sisters, just a younger brother.
Brother.
How much younger was he?
3 years.
What was his name?
Robert.
What did your mother do for a job? Was she anything particular?
Housekeeper.
Housekeeper. And do you remember your school, your elementary schooling?
Yes.
Do you remember any particular teacher?
Yes, I remember Miss Brandon and Miss Jenkins.
Why did they come to your memory?
Well, I went to school in a fountain school, one-room school, and they made an impression. You got to know them pretty well. And they knew you. And it was a small class. Well, even though it was 8 grades, there were not that many students there.
Who was your best friend in school while you were growing up?
Oh, my wife's cousin, Joe Taylor, I guess.
Tell me what you and Joe did.
Pardon me?
Can you tell me what you and Joe did without embarrassing your wife's cousin?
Well, we were the big thing of that period for entertainment. You had to mostly walk, especially kids, and big thing in the summertime was they called them festivals or ice cream socials. The churches had them, and the thing was we would walk, Joe and I would walk to the neighboring church or to the church out here. Around that was about the biggest entertainment, and we both went to church together, Fountain Church, and we played ball together. They had a church ball team, and we played with that.
What position did you play?
Gee, I don't. Field.
Field. What religion were you?
Protestant.
Did you finish school?
Eighth grade, high school.
And what was your hopes? What did you hope to be?
Well, I had hopes of being an engineer. And I was never very good at math, and I went for a semester at Potomac State College, local college, and I couldn't make the grade in math. And I dropped out.
Your father had enough money to send you to school, or
Well, he was back to work then. Yeah, he'd been called back to work, and he paid my tuition. It was $90.
for the one term?
Yeah.
When you graduated from high school, was it only to eighth grade, or was it to 12th?
The what?
Was your school only to 8th grade?
I graduated from the one-room school. It was
Yeah.
only to the 8th grade, yes.
And then where did you go for more schooling?
Kaiser High School.
Kaiser High School?
Yeah, where we came from.
And that was all the way to 12th grade?
Right.
And when you graduated on that day from Kaiser High School, do you recall that day?
Not particularly.
Not particularly. If there was one day of your teenage years that you could recall, or you do recall because something happened, can you tell me what that was? The most important thing that happened to you?
I guess the one thing that I remember was we were always taught to respect your elders and your teachers and all of that. But at that particular time, there was no school buses, and I had to either walk from here into school, or I was fortunate enough to have a cousin that had an automobile, and he was going into school, and for a year or so I rode with him. And I can remember one time when we had a day like last week, when the temperature was down in the 20s or blowing snow. And if you recall, coming across the top of the mountain here, there's a field in there, and the snow was coming out through there. It was cold, very cold, and I was walking to school is what I was doing, and it was slow. Well, I'd waited for a ride and didn't show up, so I'm a little late getting started, actually. I got into school and into my home room. I went in, of course, classes had started then. And we had one teacher, the homeroom teacher, jumped on me for being late. And I jumped back. If he had to walk 3 miles through the snow and ice and wind, he might be late too. The only time I ever talked back to a teacher.
And then you graduated.
Yeah.
Then you went to Potomac State, tried it for engineering, but couldn't make the math grade.
Right.
So what happened then? I mean, you had to do something.
Well, I came out of Potomac State, and I had intentions of going back and maybe try another major or try something else, and I had guidance from teachers I got to know in high school, and they told me to go back and try some other major, history or something that appealed to me, that I could understand and master rather than a foreign language of math. So I came up, and my dad got me a job as an apprentice at the car shops, railroad car shops in Kaiser. And I was doing them to get enough money to try to school again. And he got the job at 37.5 cents an hour.
And what was your job at 37.5 37.5 cents an hour. What were you actually doing?
Repairing cars, which entailed driving rivets and you called it bucking rivets. You had to, the hot rivet, if you know what I'm talking, was taken out of the it wasn't a furnace, I forget what they called it, but it was taken out, stuck in the hole, and you put your tool on the head of the rivet, while the man on the other side had a hammer, air hammer, that he spread it out and tightened it up.
Was it a loud job?
Yeah.
How long did you work at this type of job?
I stayed there till I was called to the Army, till the draft.
So you were drafted.
Yeah.
Did you want to go, or was it you had to and there was no choice about it?
Well, the draft was starting then, and they were drafting, and I had to go. I had no other choice. I was healthy enough, and I could. Sooner or later, I would have had to go. So, in my wisdom, I said, "Well, I'll go in the first or the second draft. I'll go there and I'll get it over with, and get my year over with, and then I'll come back and I'll be on my own. I can go back to school, do whatever I want. All these other kids are going in the Army and take deferments. I could have got deferred, even with a job or even by the thoughts of going to school.
But you chose to go in.
I chose to to go ahead and go in because it was, at that time it was a year. You go in, serve a year, and it's over with.
But that's not what it turned out to be.
No, it's not. That was June of '41, and we were shipped out from Belvior, Virginia, out to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii.
Before we get into that, I wanted to ask you about Kaiser itself. Was it a large town when you were growing up? Booming town? What describe Kaiser in the late 30s?
It was a thriving town because of the railroad. And they had the railroad shops and railroad yards. They made up trains and shipped west, east, and west, and whatever they were. It was an important employment for the town. About everybody gainfully employed, they worked at the railroad, or for the road, either on the road or at the shops.
Was there any particular place you liked to hang out during your spare time in Kaiser?
5 and 10.
Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, the Sugar Bowl.
What's that?
It was a place next to the, very close to the school. It was a soda fountain. Sold ice cream, milkshakes.
How much could you get an ice cream cone for in a depression? Nickel. Did you have any girlfriends?
Had one.
Is she sitting here? Wise choice.
There were, I dated a couple different girls, but nothing serious.
And this was all before, you were 20 by 1939. And you had tried college, didn't work.
Right.
You are now apprenticing at the railroad. Making okay money, would you say? Decent wage?
Well, for the time, it's 37.5 cents an hour. It was course, gasoline was 5 gallon for $1 too. Everything was relevant.
And at this time, were you still living out here
Yeah.
on the mountain?
Yes.
And traveling into town daily? And then you got your draft notice and you chose to go in early instead of a deferment.
Right.
Where did you have to show up to get on the bus to go to wherever you were going to go? Was it into Kaiser you had to show up?
The
To go in the
draft
military?
for the
Yeah.
Army, you had to, we had to get on a train and go to Clarksburg. And there's where we were inducted in the Army. You had to show up at the train station. If I remember correctly, there was a Army representative there that took us on.
Did you know anybody else there at Clarksburg? You were just by yourself?
Yep.
Had you traveled much during the 30s outside of this area?
Not much. Well, maybe more than a lot of them, a lot of kids my age, because my dad, like I say, for this area, my dad worked at the railroad, and along with his pay, he got passes to ride the railroad free of charge. The passenger passes, and he could get me a pass. It was limited to how many a year, of course, but
And where did you go?
well, I had an uncle and a cousin, uncle and two uncles and two aunts, and cousin. She was about my age, and she's about maybe 2 years younger than me. And we were, I liked to ice skate. And that time the runs would freeze and the ponds would freeze, and I could ice skate in the winter. But occasionally, if I had a chance to go up on Friday, and we would go ice skating at a public rink in downtown Pittsburgh. And she was a good skater. She made a show, or was in a skating show.
So you went to Pittsburgh now and again?
Yeah.
Then you went to Clarksburg, and you didn't know anybody there.
No.
You have traveled before a little bit.
Yeah.
But what did they do at Clarksburg to you?
They inducted us into the Army, and we were sworn in. And I remember we were overnight. The next day we went to Cincinnati, which was replacement depot. I can't remember the name of the fort was, or the place of induction was across the river from the city of Cincinnati.
In Kentucky?
Yeah.
And that's where they inducted you and gave you uniforms and...
Yeah, that's where you got your uniform, and you waited your assignment, which some were assigned to infantry, some to cavalry. Can't say it.
And how long were you there near Cincinnati?
A month.
And did you make friends rapidly?
Yeah, you made friends.
Do you recall any of them?
No, not particularly.
Did you have to stay at... Where did you stay?
We had barracks.
Barracks.
It was a regular Army camp.
How'd they treat you?
It was also a breaking in place. and you had to, they taught you to march, and especially to do KP, wash dishes, and cooking utensils.
Can you tell me about the camp? Where your barracks were, or did you get switched around, or did you have the same at Cincinnati?
No, we were assigned barracks, and we stayed there until we got an assignment to our basic training camp,
Where was your basic training camp?
Belvior, Virginia.
Why Belvior?
Engineering. On the, I had no knowledge of how the Army worked or what it was. I thought everybody was the same. I didn't know there was of infantry and artillery and engineers branches, of the Army. But in my induction papers, I had to put what my education was, and I put down that I had been in studying engineering in college, and from that they assigned me to an engineer battalion.
Even though
Belvior.
even though you couldn't hack the math,
Right.
they still figured that you wanted to be an engineer.
Yep.
How did you get to Cincinnati? Did you take a bus?
So it was trained from the Army camp over to Cincinnati.
No. How did you get to Army camp at Cincinnati? By train?
Train, yes.
And then they sent you back east to Belvior
Right.
by train?
Yep.
You had no problem riding on trains, did you?
No.
And when did you arrive at Fort Belvior? Can you recall?
It would have been early July of 1941. I don't know.
And when you got off the train at Fort Belvior, is that where the train came in? At the fort itself?
No, the train came into Washington, into D.C. station, and we were bused from there out to, trucked. It was not bused. You got on an Army truck, and they took you to Fort Belvior.
And when you jumped off the back of the truck, do you remember that day? No.
Not particularly, no.
Not particularly. What was your first impression of Fort Belvior?
I guess organization, how everything was organized, and the cleanliness of it.
Was it different from the camp near Cincinnati?
Not particularly, no. Army camps and Army camps. So.
But you had grown up here in the mountains, being in the east where it's flatter. Did that make any difference to you? Or
Where what?
where it's flatter, where there's no mountains nearby? Fort Belvior is not in the mountains.
No. No, it didn't make any difference.
Didn't make any difference. You had been gone a month. Had you written back home?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I wrote.
How was your mother taking you being gone?
I really don't know. My mother and my father were not emotional people. You never knew. You knew that there was love there and kindness, but they never showed much emotion one way or the other.
But you were gone for a month now,
Yeah.
and you're at Fort Belvior. What did you do at Fort Belvior?
Basic training.
Which consisted of?
Well, basic training is learning to learning to march, learning to deploy to in a battle situation, learning to shoot. Well, the basic things of the Army.
What did you like doing the best?
I guess rifle shooting was the best thing I liked. I didn't care much for marching and that type of thing.
Did they give you anything after basic training? Did they go into more advanced training of any sort?
No. Just regular basic training. That's what they gave you.
And how long did that last?
13 weeks.
How was the food at Belvior?
It was different from what I was used to. From home cooking, my mother was an excellent cook, and it was different, but it was good. It was all right. I can say that I ate what I was given. And
So you did basic training at Belvior, but you had thought you would become an engineer there? Is that what you were thinking?
well, I didn't know what was down the road, what they had in store for me, or what I would be assigned to.
So you didn't know that
No.
you were going to be an engineer at this time. Well, after 13 weeks of basic training, where'd they send you?
Hawaii.
That's a long ways from the mountains of West Virginia. Were you surprised?
Yes.
Did you have any idea why you were going to Hawaii?
None at all. We had no idea. Now this is we're coming out of there and we're finishing basic in September. And it's hot weather, still hot weather. But we were issued OD uniforms, olive drab wool uniforms. So they did not tell you where you were going. No one, they didn't tell you when you got on the train. You didn't know until you got there where you were going. So, like I say, we got on the train and it took us, I think, 7 days to go across the country.
You said we, that mean a whole group of
The
men?
whole, yeah, the whole company of it. And we traveled on, but our thoughts were we were going to up to Alaska, or in a cold climate, because they issued these warm clothes. And you got on this train and it was not air conditioned. There was no air conditioning. We got roasted and got across Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and those places.
And where did you end up at on the West Coast?
San Francisco. We came, the train went directly right to the waterfront. And all we did was walk across the street and get on the ship. We got in there like maybe 11 o'clock in the morning. And the ship, we boarded ship and it sailed at 1 o'clock.
And you had no idea where it was going?
Still no idea where it was going.
Still thinking possibly Alaska?
Could have been, yeah. I remember going under the Golden Gate Bridge and sailing out.
You remember the name of the boat?
No.
So when did you find out it was going to be in Hawaii?
When we got to close enough to some of the crew to find out where the ship was going.
How was that first big ocean ride?
Well, I was on the. It took us 5 days to go from Frisco to Hawaii, and I was sick for 5 days.
Could you hold any food down?
No,
How was your weight?
it dropped. I weighed, I think, maybe 145 at that particular time.
Well, you used to weigh, on average, how much?
Well, about 150 at tops weight.
How was the food? Well, you didn't eat any food on ship. Or at least you
The
did.
food,
Yeah.
very poor. The ships were leased or contracted from different countries. And this particular one, I don't know, of course they skimped as much as they could to save money or make money for the owners, and the food was generally poor. I learned from some of the crew that you get seasick and you throw up. You know, you vomit up everything just continually. And the thing to do is to eat, and mostly saltine crackers. That was if you got to know some of the crew, and they get you saltine crackers. But you couldn't keep them down, but very long. But the thing was, you could eat them, and you had something on your stomach then, was some strength.
When you got over to Hawaii, where did you land?
It was Honolulu, at the docks there. And we boarded a train, which took us up to Schofield Barracks.
At Schofield Barracks is where you ended up. What's
That
your
was base camp?
at the Schofield Barracks base camp? What was your impression of Schofield's barracks?
Big.
How about the native Hawaiians?
Pardon me?
Did you see any native Hawaiians?
Yeah. Not many at that particular time. There was none in the Army camps. Only some worked at the PX and places like that. And we weren't allowed to leave the camp. We were under quarantine for 2 weeks or a month, maybe. I don't know.
So in September you were basically confined, either on the train, on the ship, or at Schofield Barracks.
Till October the 17th, we landed at in Hawaii.
Can you tell me the type of food you ate there at Schofield Barracks versus the ship?
It was better food, but it was standard Army rations, whatever. Can't particularly.
During those early months before the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, did you know that a war was coming? Could you feel it, or did you think there was probably no chance of war?
I can't say that we knew war was coming in that sense, but we did know that it was inevitable as to what was going on in the rest of the world.
Did you know? What was your feelings toward Hitler at this time?
Hatred.
Even at this time?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because of all the news we got, that of the people the Jews he was killing, and the people he was just taking over in whole cities, whole bunches of people and murder them and kill them.
Did you know that was happening before Pearl Harbor started?
Yeah.
On the before the attack came on December 7th, what was your life like at Schofield Barracks?
Like I said, Schofield Barracks was a base camp. And we, as engineers, or Engineer Battalion, we were assigned to build something. We were not at Schofield very long, per se. We were sent out in the field to put in gun emplacements, to put in or build bomb shelters, new camps, and this type of thing. We were construction. We were 34th Engineers Construction Battalion.
Do you remember any one particular one that you built, and any difficulties you came across?
Well, I remember Camp Hawzi at Kunawai Bay. That's where we were on December the 7th.
Where was that?
We were Camp Hawzi was to be the name of it.
Was that the official name?
As far as I know, and I don't, I've never been back to it. I don't know. When I left there, when we left it on December the 7th, we never went back.
What were you doing that morning?
You want to lead up to it, or?
Can you tell me the story?
Okay, Kunawai Bay is across the island from, almost directly across the island from Pearl Harbor.
And that's where you were, Kunawai Bay?
Yeah. And Kunawai Naval Air Station is there. And it was chosen because that's where they stationed these PBYs, which is a flying boat, and they used them for search and rescue. And for 2 weeks before Pearl Harbor, before December 7th, we were, the whole island was on an alert, or they call it an exercise. They did what they given assignments, and they protecting or guarding the beach, but these PBYs, now we were right close to the bay, and these PBYs would take off for 2 weeks. They'd take off at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they were heavy enough that and this was still water, they were heavy enough that they taxed it over the full length of the bay as much as they could to lift off. They just lifted off, and they just barely went over our barracks. For 2 weeks, they shook us out of bed every morning. Couldn't. The alert was over on December the 6th, at midnight, December the 6th. The alert was over. The PBYs did not go out that Sunday morning, and we got to sleep in. So we get Sundays off then, and we got to sleep in and get a late breakfast.
Can you tell me what your job was on some of those days during that alert? What was your job?
It was normal. It was normal for us. We were not combat. Like I say, we were construction people, and we were not combat, so we were not given any duties to guard the beach or to exercises to do fighting.
So you just got up and went to work?
Yeah.
Right.
Work as usual.
And then the attack came.
Yes.
What did you say?
Well, of course, it was a complete surprise. We didn't know. And like we were standing in line, in the breakfast line. A lot of them go in the kitchen or the dining, the barracks that we put up for a dining hall, mess hall.
You were in the middle of the line,
Yeah,
outside?
yeah. We were outside, but we heard all this noise from. We could not see the Naval Air Station from where we were, but we hear there was a lot of noise there, and that was not really too unusual because there was always something happening there. There's planes or engines were running and like that, but this was unusual noise. And then there was a lot of smoke. Billows of smoke started coming up, and I'll never forget. Cannot forget that behind me in line was a guy that I knew. Of course, you knew all your mates there, but I knew him and was particularly interested in him because for a hobby, he made model airplanes, and he was big in that. And these planes, these dive bombers, were coming in and bombing the Naval Air Station. And then they pull up, of course, and one of them pulled up over our camp, and he looked up and he saw, you could see the big red emblem on the wing, and he said, "Jap zeros," and he took off for the brush. He started running, and then we all scattered.
Where did you run?
Like I said, this was a camp that was in progress, and we had to put in all of the services, electric, water, and sewage. And one of them was a big sewer ditch. We had just dug the thing. It was not, there was no pipe laid in it yet. It was big enough to accommodate about a 24, 30-inch pipe to carry sewage out. And there was nothing in it, and that's where I hid for, was that ditch, and that's where I got into the ditch. At that time we could hear the machine guns or the planes rattling, and then a couple came across and strafed us, and we got out of sight as quick as we could.
Did you see bullets hitting the pavement and in the ground?
In the ground, yeah. And I can never. One of those planes, of course, they were flying low, and you look up and I could still see that Japanese pilot in there with his. Couldn't see much facial features, but he had his cap on, and you could see the goggles, and see the face.
How many planes do you reckon strafed your camp?
I would say maybe 4. They were not. There was the camp. Their interest, the Japanese interest, seemed to be with ships blowing up equipment rather than killing people. They didn't strafe or didn't do anything in the city of Honolulu. I think maybe one person, 1 or 2, got hurt. Somebody. So they weren't interested in our camp particularly. And there was nothing there other than trucks and maybe a bulldozer. There was no fighting equipment, no airplanes, and no battleships, but nothing of war.
So those 4 airplanes strafed your camp, and then they left.
Yeah, they just made a pass over it, and then took off out of sight.
What did you do then?
We didn't know what to do. And the captain finally, things quieted down, and the planes left. They were gone. Things got quiet, and we were assembled back at the back at the barracks. And I guess the captain, commanding officer, got on a radio or phone, and he came out and I can remember that he said, "Men, this is it." He said, "We've been attacked. The Japanese have attacked at Pearl Harbor and destroyed the battleships there." He said that's what was happening to the Naval Air Station. There was 36 PBYs stationed there, and only one would fly after they finished. I'd like to say they were after things of war, not particularly personnel.
Did you only see the airplanes for those 4 airplanes fly over, or did you see more?
No, I did see more.
And not during the second attack?
I think this was the second attack.
I see. Who was your commanding officer that gave that "this is it" speech? Don't remember.
Don't remember.
Did you have any close friends by that time in that battalion, construction battalion?
Oh, there were friends. And like I said, I was taken by this fellow that made model airplanes, and I liked him.
You recall his name?
Mm-mm.
Well, the next day, after the attack, what happened?
Well, where we were during the attack, where we were was about 60 miles from our base camp from Schofield. That's 60 miles of road you had to go. And when we were deployed and sent out to do this job, we left our rifles back at camp. They were locked up in the barracks. So we didn't, and I guess the captain was ordered to defend the beach or whatever, and he sent some of us out with pick handles to defend the beach because we were sure. I guess everybody was certain there was going to be a landing, a Japanese landing, and we were right on the beach, and we were sent out to defend the beach
With axe handles.
Yeah, axes, pick handles, whatever, how to handle them, or whatever you could use. And then we were there for the day, and then we were ordered. He got orders that we were to report back to Schofield, back to home base. We pulled out and bring all of our equipment. We pulled out that night. The truck I was riding in was pulling a trailer, and that trailer was loaded with dynamite. And they're traveling at night without lights. They didn't want any lights at all. And try to keep the truck in front, and keep it as close as you could in sight in front of you, and occasionally it'd stop, and like ours would stop, and the truck behind us would run into that trailer of dynamite. We didn't figure we'd make it back, but we did.
So it was a harrowing night journey of 60 miles.
What?
It was a scary journey for 60
Very
miles.
scary.
Was that like a 3-hour ride in them trucks?
It was, yeah, because we got, it may have been longer than that, but we left that camp, left Kunawai, and on the trucks, and ended up at Schofield about 11:30 at night, and we were given our arms and ammunition and we were deployed from the camp out into the pineapple fields and cane fields to guard, protect the invasion that was supposed to come.
Were you just by yourself, or were you in little groups?
It was a group.
Do you remember who was in your group that third night after?
Not particularly.
Not
No.
particularly. How long did you keep going out at night and daytime to protect the field?
This lasted for maybe 10 days. That we would take off every morning and have be deployed to a certain area. And then they'd get orders, move from there to another one until that was about 10 days.
What did you do during the must have been hideous boredom out there and wherever you were standing? What did you do?
Just stood there. And of course, if you caught sleeping, it would reprimand you pretty good.
Let's switch tapes here.
Destroy it.
Did you go back into building any more construction projects?
Yeah, we were. From then on, we were. They put us to building defense projects like gun emplacements, towers, observation towers, foxholes, things like that.
And what did you actually do when you built these things? What was your primary job?
Whatever I was assigned, if it was to dig a ditch, well, I was given a pick and shovel, and if it was to carry material, I'd done that, and whatever.
Were you a private still this time?
Yeah.
Did you work any heavy equipment?
No.
Did you pour any concrete?
Well, I helped pour concrete too. Of course, they mixed it with a mixer, and as they poured it in the ditch, I had to work around into the forms.
But it was still basically just labor.
Yeah, yeah.
Were you given any more training on anything beyond just labor?
No.
Did you get to have any leave shortly after Pearl Harbor attacks, like after Christmas?
Well, I'll back up a little. It seems as though every time you changed camps, you were put under quarantine. And that's what happened when we went from Schofield Barracks out to Camp Hawzi. We were quarantined again. And our quarantine ended on December the 6th. And of course, we're from Honolulu. We're across the island from Honolulu. But the captain told us that we were no longer quarantined, and if we wanted to go into town, there would be a truck to take us on leave. We'd get a pass for that day to go in. And his advice was that if you plan to send anything home for Christmas, to any of your gifts or anything, to your parents or whoever, you'd better buy them and get them in the mail or get them in shipment today or tomorrow, which was the 6th of December, because everything moved by sea and by land at that time, and it would take that long to get them So I bought my mother a scarf. It's over there, and I bought my now wife Betty a shell purse. She still has it. So I sent them home, and they got home there for Christmas, I think. The part that, like I said to begin with, that my parents were not, they didn't show much emotion or whatever, but the thing that we were instructed to, one thing was instructed after the attack was to get a note off to your parents or to whoever you wanted of your safety, that you were not, that you were still alive, I guess. And of course, like I say, everything moved. And it was about a month, or 3 weeks to a month before my parents knew whether I was dead or alive.
They knew you were in Hawaii then?
Oh yeah, then you yeah. Nothing was censored then. You could tell where you were. So my mother never, nothing more than she's the one that always wrote. My dad never wrote any letters. My mother, about all she said was, we was worried about you, how you got along.
Did you get to see any entertainment while you were in Hawaii?
Oh yeah. After things settled down, and I guess it was 6 weeks before we were able to get another pass to go into Honolulu, and then things got progressively better as got into the war and the attack on the different islands, and found out that they were not going to attack Hawaii, or there was not that much danger that they were. They didn't, not that they weren't going to do it, but they would have had they been able to take the other small islands that they had attacked and inhabited.
Did you know, or were you aware of the fighting that happened at Midway in June of '42?
Yeah.
What was going through your mind at that point of the war, 6 months after Pearl Harbor?
Are we next?
And when the news of the great victory came in?
Pardon me?
When the news of the great victory at Midway came in, did you become more relaxed?
Yeah, I would say so, yes.
And did life become back to business, back to normal life after Midway? 6 months after the Pearl?
Not really normal life. You were still, if you went on pass, if you got a pass to go into town, you had to carry a gas mask and a helmet and take those with you, because there was still thoughts of attack, thoughts of danger.
Did you as June rolled around of 1942, your 1 year enlistment was coming to an end? Canceled. When did you get notice?
I don't particularly remember. I know it was given as it was news or just an announcement that you're in the Army now. Your draft, your 1 year is canceled. You're in for the duration.
How did that make you feel?
That I had made the wrong decision when I decided to go in and get my year over with.
So you actually thought before the war began it was a year service and
Yep.
then it was over.
Right.
But now you were stuck in there.
4 years.
For the next 2.5 years, while you were stationed in Hawaii, you continued to build camps and placements.
Like I said at the beginning, you had you have to fill out your, I forget what the number of it is, it's a standard form of your background and your education and all your occupation and everything. And for some reason, there was a young lieutenant, and for whatever reason, we were friends, and that was, you know, it was unusual for a officer and an enlisted person to be on a friendship basis to talk, or other than he give you orders or you report or whatever. But one day he said, this had gone on for the field duty of building and this type of thing had gone on for, I'll say about a year, maybe.
And who was he?
I
Okay.
can't remember his name. But he came to me one day when we was out digging for build a gun emplacement. And he said, Logsdon, with your background, you have no business out here digging dirt. He said, you had good grades in drafting and some good grades in your basics, engineering, even though you didn't make math very good. He said, would you consider being an Army draftsman? I didn't know there was such a thing. I said, yeah, sure, whatever. He said, okay, and said, the Army Map Service is looking for experienced people that just has some background of drafting. And he said, maybe I can get you transferred there if you would like. And I said, yeah, that'd be super for me. So we were out on Ewa Bay building where we had a base camp there, tents, and we were building towers. What they were metal towers that came in a bundle, and you put them together, bolted them together, and then you get up around 50, 60 feet, something like that, to your observation towers that you can watch the beach from. That's where it was, and he had a tent set up, and he got me a drafting table and a stool, and I was the camp draftsman. And I even sent home and had my mother send me my drafting instruments that I'd used in school. Now, I was a camp draftsman. I didn't do anything except draw dreams, houses, and things like that. There was no need for a camp draftsman, but you had to have the title in order to get transferred to headquarters company at the Army Map Service.
So he came up with a position for you.
Yeah. Had it not been for him, I don't know where I'd do.
Did you get promoted when you got
Not right away. No, well, you get general promotion from private to private first class, which is, it was basic with so much service in. I went into headquarters company, then into map service, and started in there and was promoted to T4.
When you were in the 34th Construction Engineer Battalion, what company were you in previously?
What company?
Yeah, what company?
I went directly from basic training to Company B, 34th Engineers.
And then you got switched to headquarters company
Yeah.
a year after
Now,
the
this is
attack.
headquarters company of the Central Pacific area, at Fort Shafter.
What do you mean Central Pacific area?
It covered the whole Central Pacific area, all the islands. They had the maps for them, and had to update them and supply them.
So you were no longer in 34th Engineer Battalion.
Yeah, I was still listed as a 34th, a member of the 34th Engineers, but I was on detached service.
Right. And when you became this draftsman at headquarters company, what did you do as your job?
Well, like I say, it was we had the basic maps, and they were lithographed at that time, and the basic thing was on a heavy film of it was backed with I think with a lead plate, and then it was covered with this heavy paper or film or whatever, and we had to put the information on it, add to information as it came in, and as a result of flyovers, or when we got to tacting and taking islands, and there was members that went out and did sketches, got information, measurements, and sent them back, and we added that to the maps. And it was all hand work. You had to do the lettering by hand.
And where was this job?
At Fort Shafter.
Which is in Hawaii too, right?
Yeah.
How far from Schofield was that?
Fort Shafter is almost a part of Honolulu. It's on the edge of it, and not too far from Pearl Harbor itself.
How long did you continue updating the maps as a drafter?
Until February of 1945, when it was sent out to Saipan.
How did you get transferred to that battalion?
To Saipan?
To Saipan, yes.
It was a demand by the Army, and in the Army Map Service, I was to upgrade the maps of that area, and the island of Saipan itself. We had to send survey crews out.
So Saipan was already pacified by that time?
Pretty much, yeah. There was still some activity going on. But
Did you fly to Saipan?
no.
When you floated to Saipan, did you land at a dock?
No.
How did you land?
Went over the ship, on a rope ladder. very good landing equipment, landing gear.
On an LCVP
Yeah.
landing craft. And you landed there, and were there offices set up for you already?
Yeah.
And what did you do while you were on Saipan?
Well, doing back in Hawaii of the drafting work, but then also got to I get to be a member or go out with field crews and do surveying, the location of roads. And, the Army was in charge of the water supply for the island, which was from wells, and we had to map those, show where they were and how to get to them.
So you wandered about Saipan pretty
Yeah.
much. Did you go to the cliffs where the Japanese were
Yeah.
jumped off?
Right.
Can you describe that day?
Well, to back up, when it was in Hawaii, one assignment we were given was to design an airfield for Saipan. And they had a basic of the island, basic drawing or map of it. And they had to, we had to design this airfield. And the airfield we were designing was over a mile long, runway of over a mile long. And the thoughts were, we didn't know anything about a B-29 then. Everything, the large plane then was B-17s and propeller driven, of course. Well, so was B-29, but this mile long runway was across the end of the island of Saipan, and those cliffs were at the end where they took off in the routes where the Japanese went down over.
Did you see any bodies, parts, or anything? Did you come across any caves that were used by the Japs during the war that you had to draw?
No, I don't recall that we had any.
How long did you stay at Saipan?
From February till August.
And what happened in August?
I had enough points for reassignment, enough service for reassignment back in the States.
And where did you go from Saipan to the States? And to San Francisco?
No, I went to, well, on the day that I left Saipan, they dropped the first A-bomb. And that plane took off from the island of Tinian, which was right adjacent to Saipan. And then while we were out to sea, of course, the meager news that he got that this new bomb was dropped in Japan. And then, what was it, 2 days later?
The boxcar dropped it on Nagasaki.
They dropped the next one, and then the war ended. The Japanese surrendered while I was on ship going home, or going to back to the States.
Did you know about B-29s by that time?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we knew about one of our things of entertainment, pieces of entertainment, was to go out to the airfield in the evening when the planes were taking off. They'd take off and fly at night, do their bombing, and watch them take off, and they'd taxi the length of that runway, and they'd drop out of sight. They trying to get power enough just to lift off, go over the end of the road, and then they'd drop out of sight, clear down almost to the ocean, and then they'd slowly come back up, and they'd build up power with that. They had to do it slowly to save fuel.
Did you ever see any not come back up?
No.
They all came back. How did you feel when the war was over in Europe? I know you were in Saipan, but in May of 1945, you'd been in Saipan for a few months. How did you feel? What went through your mind?
Well, the thought and opinion was that the war was about over, that it wouldn't last too long, so if they could deploy the forces that were being used in the European war, if they could deploy those to the Pacific area, it'd be more likely to end the war quicker.
Did you see any buildup of the Navy at Saipan for the invasions of any of the other islands?
Yeah, they were. Yeah. There was not so much aside. Guam seemed to be the island that they deployed from. And there were a lot of injured that were brought back to Saipan to the hospitals there. The hospitals had been set up, and dentists and so forth.
Did most of the Japanese civilians get evacuated before you got there from Saipan?
I never saw any civilians. They were the natives of the island. Were in a small village, and I never saw them. Never got to go there. But they were on the remote side of the island, and they were not evacuated. They were allowed to stay there. I guess the Army took care of them. I don't know what their fate was.
While you were on Saipan, did you see any shows or entertainment come by the island?
Yeah, there was a couple shows came out, and then we've had movies in the evening.
Were there any big name entertainers that came to Saipan that you recall?
I don't recall that they were.
So you were on the boat when the bombs were dropped and the war ended. Had you made it back to the States before the surrender?
No. We were, I can remember that I was on a ship on the way back to the States. And of course all this, the news that the bombs had been dropped and that Japan was going to surrender, and when the surrender came, we were out in the ocean, but we were opposite Pearl Harbor or Hawaii. And in the middle of the night, our ship made about a 90-degree turn. Now, why that woke us up, or why we were conscious of it, I don't know, because the ship plowing through the water, you know. But for some reason it woke us up, and we got the news that we had been ordered to put into Pearl Harbor, put into Hawaii, that they needed a ship to transport troops to Japan, invasion troops. And then maybe the next day, the ship changed course again, and the news from the crew that we got to know came that the captain of the ship had been on the horn all night and reporting that his ship needed certain repairs and needed fuel, and he had to come back to the States. And finally, they ordered him back to the States, and so he did the 9 to go to Hawaii, and then the 9 to go back to the States.
And you came in San Francisco?
Yeah.
From there, where did you go?
Camp Atterbury, Indiana. And we were the first to be discharged. Instead of reassignment, they gave us discharges from the Army.
Right there at Camp Atterbury, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did you do? Get on a train?
Yep.
And came right here to Kaiser.
Yeah.
Did your parents meet you at the train station?
Yeah. It was kind of ironic. My brother had been in the Air Force, and he had been shot down over Italy, and he was taken prisoner of war for a few days, and it wasn't over Italy, it was Yugoslavia. And he was taken prisoner for a few days, and it was in the time that the Americans were driving the Germans out. And he was released then, and he suffered some injuries. But when I got on the train, here my brother was. He was on his way home.
Was he at the same camp that you had just left? Or just saw him on the train?
No, I don't know where. He was at an Air Force camp, and I don't know whether it was maybe in Texas. I don't remember.
So you both were on the same train heading
Yeah.
home?
First time we'd seen each other for 4 years.
And when you stepped off that train, was your mother and father there?
Yeah.
Did they get any emotional there?
No. Just glad to see you home. Oh, glad that you're all right.
Then you went to home, quarter mile down the road, right?
Yep.
And did they give you your old room back?
Yep.
And you were out of the Army. You were a vet, 25, 26 years old, right? Did you get a job?
Yeah, there's no trouble getting a job. Everybody was looking for employees, and the mailman, Charlie Kaiser, I knew him before I went in the Army, and of course he carried all my mail and delivered all my mail to my folks and whatever. And I knew I was a friend of his son. But anyway, he came into the house one day, shortly after I got home, and he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, don't know, I'm going to rest for a while. Don't make up my mind. He said, "Why don't you go to the post office? They're hiring in there. They'll put you to work." So I went in, and they did. I spent 33 years there.
So you were retired postal worker.
Yeah.
Did you go to any more schooling?
Well, I took some classes at the University of Hawaii, and I did correspondence courses in land surveying, and I became a land surveyor, a licensed land surveyor. And I
Was that during the war?
No, this is after the war.
After.
Well, the classes in Hawaii were during the war. At that particular time, we were stationed at Punahou campus in downtown Honolulu for 6 or 8 months.
And that was after Pearl Harbor, before you went to become camp draftsman, right?
Pardon me?
It was while you were stationed during the war in Hawaii, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was initially went to Fort Shafter, and then they set up an engineering, took over this Kunawai school, which was a girls' school, but the Army took over the whole thing, and they made it a branch of the headquarters of the Central Pacific area. It was bigger and more room than they had at Shafter. So we had a big swimming pool, and we had a pretty good time there.
During the whole war, did you ever see any Japanese besides that one moment of a Japanese airplane flying over you?
I run into one night on Saipan. He was raiding the our garbage cans. And he was one of those people that had escaped or had not got killed and had not surrendered.
What did you do?
I didn't do anything. It was just a kind of an instant thing. I'd gone to the latrine and came around the corner, and there he was. And he saw me, and he took off. So, of course, it's dark. It was he was gone.
After the war, did you stay in touch with anybody from your company?
Yeah.
Who?
Well, there was Dean Stout. He was a landscape architect, and he had been in our drafting room. And I kept in touch with him until he died a couple years ago. And then there was Bob Danner from Milwaukee, and he was an artist. And I still keep in touch with him. And then there was Earl McMahon. He's a graduate engineer, and he's up in a nursing home up in New York now. We generally get Christmas cards. There were several others for a while, and then kind of dropped out.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yeah, the Legion, the VFW, Pearl Harbor survivors.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war?
Yeah.
How so?
War is an ugly thing. Should never be. We shouldn't be in war now. I read the books of accounts of dropping the bombs in Japan, and that disgusts me. I don't think it should have been done. How many civilians were killed, and they were dropped on civilian. The Japanese attacked a military thing. We dropped them on civilian cities, and civilian places, and I'm sure that to this day there's still some that's suffering from the effects of those atomic bombs. They could have, if they had to display, they could have picked an island, a little island, uninhabited island out in the Pacific, and dropped a bomb, or even dropped it offshore, and showed them what could be done, and encourage them to surrender them that way. I think if they'd seen that, they would have.
Did you get?
That's my thoughts on it.
Did you get to a point earlier? I know it's 2005 now, but back when Truman was still president in the late 40s, did you have these thoughts then?
Pretty much, yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to add to our interview? Any other questions I I need to ask you?
I don't know anything. No.
Well, I appreciate you for sharing your recollections with me and the Veterans History Project, and I hope you tell your other friends about the project. And,
Okay.
thank you very much, Mr. Logsden.
You're welcome.